Okay, we're going to be grafting 2 pieces of lace knitting using the duplicate stitch method and 2 contrasting colors of waste yarn. This is a simple lace stitch called Milanese lace. It's only a 6-stitch repeat. It does, however, have lace stitches on both sides. So we have our 2 pieces of knitting here, and this will work if you have 2 pieces of knitting that are going in the same direction, such as if you were doing a continuous loop like a cowl and you want to graft the ends together, or a sideways yoke of a pullover sweater, something like that. So what you would do is cast on using a waste yarn, work a couple of rows. For the lace, it's a good idea to work the rows in pattern, and then switch to a contrasting waste yarn for 1 row, work it in pattern, switch to your main yarn, knit around your cowl or whatever you have, finishing up here. This piece shows how you finish. You would work to the same pattern row, break your main yarn, leaving a long tail for grafting. Join your contrasting waste yarn, that is the yarn that you're going to follow with your grafting yarn, and work 1 row. It must be the same pattern row as the first row for it to work out properly. And then switch to a second color of waste yarn, work at least 1 row in pattern, and then another row or 2, and then bind off. So here we have our 2 pieces, and I'm just going to show you first how a preliminary look at the stitches that we're going to need to follow. Now this is a little bit tricky because, as you can see, some of the stitches are actually knit 2 together. So there's 2 stitches here in the contrasting yarn which are knit together by one of the main yarn. And then we have some yarn overs, which would be here. So we're going to have to follow the path of our contrasting yarn very carefully to graft this accurately. So we're going to take our needle. It's coming off of the bottom piece of lace, and then we're going to follow the top loop of the contrasting waste yarn, which means that we're going to go up through this stitch, pull this fairly snug because this first stitch is going to tend to lock in on itself. Continue to follow that loop of yarn. Go back to our bottom piece of knitting. And now what we're going to do is follow the next loop, which is going to be right here. Go back to our top after we finish this stitch. Okay, and here we see that this stitch goes right through there. So we pull that tight. Not too tight, but matching the tension of the stitches. Go back to our bottom loop, and we can see that we've already followed this loop here with our grafting yarn. Sometimes you might want to check and make sure that you're not going over the same stitch twice accidentally. So we go on to the next stitch, and then back up here. Now here is where we have 2 stitches that are knit 2 together. So we're going to follow the bottom stitch first. There we go. And then we're going to come down here. And look, our yarn is doing another strange little thing. So we're going to follow it. It actually goes through 2 stitches, because in the stitch pattern, that bottom loop of the stitch was actually knitting 2 stitches together in the row below. So now we're going to go back, and remember we have not yet done the second of these 2 stitches that were wrapped around the same stitch. So we're going to do that again. Remember, we're just following the path of the light colored yarn. That's all we're doing. Come back down here. Follow that loop. Okay. And now we're going to follow this loop here. So we have a few fairly simple loops going on. But now, in a minute, we're going to come to our yarn over. So first we're going to follow this loop here. Go back up. Follow this one. Okay, now here, the yarn is doing an odd thing where it just goes around this one loop. Okay, this is part of the yarn over, so we just follow it. That's it. We don't have to figure out what we're supposed to do or where the yarn goes. We just follow that contrasting waste yarn. So then we go up here and follow it right through there. Okay, back down here. And remember, on the bottom piece, we only want to follow the bottom loops. And the top piece, we follow the top loops. So even though the yarn is doing a funny little thing here, this contrasting yarn, that's not the loop we want to follow. We just want to follow this loop. Or once again, it's only going through one loop of the main yarn. Okay. And then we're going to come back over here. We're back to the original stitches of our stitch pattern that we started with. So you can see we're back to this stitch, which is right next to the two that are knit together. So we're just going to keep doing what we did before. Let's see. So I can see here that this loop I've already followed with my grafting yarn. So I'm going to go on to the next loop. Like so. Over here I'm going to follow the bottom loop of that contrasting yarn. Okay, come down here. Now remember, this loop actually goes through a couple of stitches, so let's make sure we do that. Okay, come back up here and go through the second loop, just like we did for the first repeat of this stitch. All right, I'm going to do one more stitch here. And then we're going to take a look and see how we did. Okay. Oops. Okay, so let's take a look and see how we're doing. Now, as you can see, these columns of knit stitches are lining up nicely. And also our yarn overs seem to be lining up nicely, although we'll be able to tell better once we remove the contrasting yarn.